Hello, everybody. My name is Efosa Guobadia. I'm the CEO of the nonprofit organization Onward Together. It's a 501c3. So glad to be part of that organization. I get a chance to work with amazing people every day to pursue things that we believe in. And I want to actually touch on some of the things that we believe in as an organization and what guides us forward. We have a mission in the organization. Our mission is to increase access to quality rehab medicine around the corner and around the world. And we have this real deep understanding of the importance of access and how salient that is. One of the infrastructural things we see about access, either a place doesn't exist for people to go to, number one, or if a place does exist, people at times don't have the means to go to that place, or if a place exists, or people have the means, that place might not have what the community needs. So how can we assess access in a multi-dimensional way and lean into it as such? So that's our mission. The vision of the organization, the things that we're pursuing is a clinic in every community, in the sense of community in every clinic, the chance for healing to happen in every community, and chance for community to happen in every place there's a healing in a clinic. The former speaks to horizontality of where we want to go. This is a global mission. It's a vision that we're pursuing. And the latter speaks to penetration and verticality. And then lastly, the essence of Move Together is movement. We believe in the transformative power of movement and movement's power, positive potential to improve things for the individual and the collective. The transformative power of movement and movement's potential to improve things for the individual and collective. So I'm having this conversation from Guatemala City, Guatemala. So very grateful to be sharing time with Lisa VanHoose, a great colleague of mine, a great friend of mine that I've learned much from and learned much with. So Lisa, I'm going to pass the baton to you. How are you? Where are you? And what are you working on these days?
No, I have to admit, I am so excited to be able to spend time and space with you. So welcome everyone. I'm here in Monroe, Louisiana, which is part of what's called the Southern Delta region, where, you know, one of the things that people think about us when you think about states like Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, is poor health outcomes and measures. And so I'm at the University of Louisiana, Monroe, which is a minority serving institution. We're not a historical Black college or university, but we have a very large minority population. 40% of our student body is self-identifies as having a minority status. We have a large population of first-generation students, students from lower socioeconomic settings. And so we are very passionate about education being a way in which to increase access for all. The other thing that the university is known for is its mission towards increasing the healthcare workforce. And so that is part of my calling why I'm here. We're developing a physical therapy program here in Monroe, Louisiana. The other thing that I do is I am the owner and founder of the Ujima Institute, whose mission is to facilitate conversations and action to improve the health and wellness of Black communities. And our vision is a world that has no inequities related to Black communities, a world where we reduce all of these structural, perceived, and are also actual barriers to health and wellness. So I am so excited for today's conversation. It's going to be a good one, y'all.
Okay, looking forward to it. So thank you so much for sharing. And it's so great to follow the great work that Ujima has been doing at Ujima Institute. So we want to welcome you all and appreciate everybody that's sharing time with us today. It really means much to us. So this is going to be the beginning of a series of conversation. And the way we want to think about it is not just as a conversation, as an exploration for growth. I'm reminded about the old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So let's go together, let's move together, so to speak, as we have this conversation and this exploration. I'm going to start, and we want to start, Lisa and I, by speaking to the times, you know, that we're in currently. First, to speak to COVID-19. You know, we're in a time in which the whole world is dealing with this pandemic, and really want to wish everyone our best. And since the early part of the year, much has happened that has been unexpected. And in the time, everyone, much is still to come that is unknown. So these are the times that is really important as we're all going through adversities in all our different ways around the corner, around the world, to lean on the pillars in our life. You know, faith, love, family, community. That's how we move forward individually and collectively. And then the social dynamics that we find ourselves in as well. around the world, we're starting to have conversations about social dynamics that we really haven't had in some ways as tangibly as before, one might say, or as in the forefront as before. So I think it's very important. It is important to recognize it. We've had moments and incidents over the last several months that have brought different feelings for people. Feelings of pain, feelings of confusion, and feelings of cynicism, the whole spectrum of feelings. You know, and these feelings right now in these days lead us to a time that we should recognize and say, okay, let's lean in. Let these feelings wash over us and let's use it for good, and let's lean in. Because what this is all about, a conversation like this, a conversation we have with our family members, hopefully the conversations we have with our colleagues, it's about pursuing the best world possible. I'll say that one again. It's about pursuing collectively the best world possible. And that's a side and that's a team I think we could all play on. So that is the calling before us. That's the adventure. When you think about exploration, that's the adventure that awaits. And I want us to really grab this. Not then, but now. Not far away or down the road, but right here, together. That word together again, right here, together. And in doing so, let's be aspirational in our aim. Let's be humble in our approach. Lisa, I'm going to give you the baton here. We're connecting not too long ago. A quote that Lisa and I love. And the quote's by Churchill. And the quote goes, to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change very often. To improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. So what is that? What is now begat? Pursuing the most perfect union wherever we are. Pursuing the most perfect systems wherever we engage and wherever we work. And that's the opportunity. Lisa, I'm going to pass you the baton.
I totally, you spoke to my heart with that one, right? Because I think what COVID-19 has taught us is that we are all very connected, right? So when we were in our day-to-day life and distracted, or some, Eckhart Tolle might even say unconscious, we forgot how connected we were. And so COVID-19 has been a great lesson to realize that when this over here has to stop, like come to a screeching halt, what is the impact on your world also? So I am grateful for that lesson. I think the other thing that it has really taught us is how we have to broaden our view of trauma. Because although the pandemic, some people kind of view it as, this medicinal viral pandemic that, is really kind of focused on the infectious disease. The reason why it is having such an impact in the US is because of the multiple social crises that we have allowed to happen. That has happened on our watch for each and every one of us. And I think as healthcare providers, I often think about the fact that we, in some form or fashion, took this oath of no harm. And so I do hear in social media and in professional conversations, well, we just need to focus on, just the medical manifestations and, addressing the disease sequela. But we also have to recognize the fact that we have a moral and a societal and a professional obligation to also address the social trauma or the racial trauma. Because we know from research, be it allostatic load, be it HPA axis dysfunction, telomere studies, we know that trauma will impact one's ability to function, to move, and even to live, right? And so as healthcare providers, if we're not going to also deal with that part of the human experience, then we have to say that we're not providing holistic or patient-centered care. And so I want people to expand their brains and also their scope of practice to realize that trauma is one of the things we have to address also. Because there's a book called The Love Warrior, and the author talks about the fact that your body keeps score, that your trauma is in your cells and in your tissues, right? And until that trauma is dealt with, it does not matter what we do as physicians, nurses, PTs, OTs. Somebody's got to address what's in those cells and tissues because the body has a memory. So where are we headed to, Efosa?
I love that so much, Lisa, how you're introducing trauma in a multidimensional way, not just the traditional way that we think about it, injury, trauma to system, to joint, inflammation, the whole nine. What is that trauma? What might that trauma be in ourselves, our soul, our spirit, which is very, very tangible, feeling deeper. And then so we can look at the multidimensional way of the individual, but then the individual in trauma to the body politic. You know, what in our communities, in our countries, and sort of near and far needs to be assessed. The way we do as clinicians or physical therapists, you know, well, what can't you do? What hurts? What's limited? Why? How? When? You know, okay, what is this game plan, this runway we're gonna create and strategize to make things better? So to introduce trauma in a multidimensional way for the traditional way on our body and ourselves, and also again for the individual and our body politic, it will behoove us and benefit us if we're being serious about pursuing better. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we've been really comfortable kind of moving in that space in regards to pain science. So I'm hoping that our acceptance of pain science and how that someone's perceived or actual conversation, description of their pain is real. Well, the same is true with social and racial trauma. So we need not call one thing real and then not call this other part of the human experience false. So I'm like, if we're gonna say that we're willing to accept the psychological impact of trauma, then we gotta accept it across all different variations of what trauma looks like on a personal, interpersonal, and also on a societal level.
I love that so much. I'm going to tangle with that a little bit, Lisa. You know, one of the words I spend a lot of time thinking about in ideas is the concept of compassion. And one of the ways I define compassion is this recognition that we're all on this human journey together. Some might say human struggle, you know, so then it becomes about the sharing of each other's strengths and the lessening of each other's lows. But furthermore, if we break down compassion to sort of its roots, passion means suffering. Passion means to suffer, and they looked at that a little bit differently back in the day, but it means to suffer, and the compassion means to suffer with. We do that every day as clinicians. Somebody's coming to us wanting to be better, increase their function and or decrease their pain, and we're going in that space to them. We're being present in that pain and that possibility. You know, we do that as health clinicians. So to the point of social, racial, different demographics, how could we have that open heart to be in that pain and that possibility? You're telling me this, your experiences in this way, in the past and the present like this, the best thing we can do is to be compassionate in that moment so that we can all heal together. Because what's that little Watson quote? If you come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you come because your destiny is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
Right, and it gets back to what you originally talked about, right? How there has to be a connectedness. And so last week I was talking with TWU at their advocacy forum and talking about how that the origins of advocacy came from the fact that you saw someone else's suffering and you realized how connected you were as a human to their suffering. Even if it wasn't happening to you, it was happening to humankind, which is you. And because of that, then you advocate for that person, right? And how that is very different from advocating for self. And so you have to see that connectivity. And that's even true for social injustices, where even if it's not happening in your community, if that inequity may not be your lived story, the fact that it is someone's story should call you to act.
Love it. Well said. So we're going to jam. The journey continues, and we're going to be touching on those things as we go along. I have some thoughts already rolling through. So here we are. So this is the first conversation, a series of these movement health equity conversations. Movement health equity is the title of this series, everyone. And Lisa VanHoose, I'm so thankful that you're helping to lead these off. So this is going to be a foundational conversation. We're going to set the terrain. Louis Pasteur talks about that the micro is nothing, the terrain is everything, right? So we're gonna explore some definitions, so to speak. We're gonna lay the landscape and see where it takes us. And in conversations like this and the conversations to come, keep on growing and hoping to move forward positively. So movement, we talked about it a little bit. We're going to be talking about it and actually working to define it a little bit. Movement is going to be salient in this conversation. And like I said, we'll define it in a healthcare sense, but I also want us to take the time to think about it in a philosophical sense as well. And what I mean by that is the remembrance and the understanding and the awareness that movement is what we do. Life's a contact sport. You know, we bump people, we meet people, we do favors, we get favors. We're constantly moving towards each other. You know, sometimes away, but constantly moving towards each other is humanistic. And then in our heart, we're always looking to move forward towards better. You know, so again, all these multidimensional words, movement. So this conversation specifically, the why, the macro, the foundational, you know, what's driving this conversation? What history, so we're gonna paint the paint point a little bit, you know, we're gonna paint it together. What history has always shown us and what the pandemic has laid a bit more bare, is that there's an asymmetry and an unevenness in the healthcare arena around the world. This is not a one country issue, around the world. Depending on your background or your social status or where you live, person's A experience can be vastly different from person B, and it often is. That's the space we're going to go in here. So this is a conversation. It's a humble conversation to explore, like we talked about, in this pain point. What areas can we improve in this system, in the healthcare system? Do we think we can and we should, and how might we go about it? I'm going to use the word exploration again because that is suitable here. So Lisa, help me sharpen the terrain. That's the conversation that we're having. Lean into that space with me. How else do you see it?
So when I think of movement, I think of it from being able to go from one point in time to another, right? And that endpoint may be function, that endpoint may be from a interpersonal or relational standpoint. It could even be movement across society, right? And so often and I'm going to come from a very PT-centric place, when we think of movement, what we think about is organismal movement. So that organism being able to go from place A to place B. But everything, like you so beautifully stated, is this body of concentric circles. So my ability to move across a room or to move from my house to another setting in the community is also my ability to move within society, right? So everything is connected. And so I see us as PTs having to embrace that fact of that when we talk about being movement specialists, that we also have to embrace addressing any policies or barriers that would impact somebody's movement health, and how that movement health is more than just your personal and your interpersonal movement.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And that's where we're going to actually dive in. Lisa just started shaping the idea of movement in the PT and rehab and health sales sense and beyond. So we're going to dive into defining a few things. For those who are watching, as you can see the conversation, Lisa and I, we're going to be jamming off of each other, that, you know, yes-anding and things of that nature. And we invite you guys to please share in the chat box. And throughout the conversation, we'll be looking to answer conversations throughout, and notably we want to create some space towards the back end.
And I think it's good, Efosa, I'm sorry to interrupt you, to let people know that, as you so beautifully said, this is an exploration, it's a discovery. And so there may be places that you're like, oh, let's tweak that, or I disagree. Introduce that into the conversation. That is the beauty of discourse. So discourse doesn't always have to be anger and fighting. It's just this collection of beautiful ideas and thoughts.
So well said. So Lisa, I'm going to give you the baton. We started in a movement space, so we're actually going to be breaking down a few things. We're going to talk about what movement means to us. We're going to talk about what health means to us. You know, we're going to talk about what equity means. You know, and then together, see, we can start to shape, you know, the title that we're even having this conversation, movement, health equity. And again, we invite folks to share some thoughts of how they see some of the things that we're going to break down. But again, I want to give you the baton. You started already beautifully. I want to give you the baton about the early thoughts about this conversation that we're having, why it's important, why it's relevant.
Yeah. So I think if I come in at the easy place, right, which is kind of personal movement. So what we define as physical activity, the ability to get up from a chair, to move yourself in a bed, all of those things are tied back to increased life expectancy. And so some of the research even suggests that if you can get someone in regular movement, physical activity, that will decrease their mortality rate by anywhere between 30 to 35%, right? And if you want to look at that from the opposite lens, for people that are sedentary, that, you know, move less than 3 to 5 times a week, in regards to the National Physical Activity Guidelines of 150 minutes a week, 30 minutes a day, those people have double the risk of dying prematurely, right? Now, here's where this goes even further of why this is important. Because your access to physical activity may sometimes be tied back to your zip code. And so people will say, oh, but you can get up in your house and move around. Yes, you can. But how many of you just want to walk circles in your house? And how are you going to maintain that and sustain that, right? Most of us want to be able to take that movement into a community space, or move with another human, or move within society. But if I live and work in places that have a ton of inequities or safety issues, then I am less likely to do that. So that is part of the reason why I come back to the factor that movement health is easiest when we talk about it in regards to just, you know, that PT term, occupational therapy term of movement from space to space. Where movement health gets really complicated is when we talk about it on a molecular and a tissue level, because there is movement there also. And when we talk about it on a societal level. So I find often that as healthcare providers, we will lean in on the easy parts. And what COVID-19 has shown us is that it is time for us to do our due diligence and lean in on a greater understanding of the molecular and tissue, cellular movements, and then also on societal and communal movement.
The environmental, societal, community. I love that so much. Okay, so it's relevant because there's always that series of why. Why is this important? Why is this important? Why is this important? Most people, most of all people say they want to live as long as they can healthily. So it has to do with our very life and living, and movement is one of the largest components of that. So that's the relevance. So Lisa, let's take this next space of breaking down and defining some of these words. And you've already said so much about movement, so you could add on any more or continue to some of the other points. And I'll lead the way here. First, I'm going to hit movement. And these are thoughts. These are not Webster dictionary definitions. I'm going to talk about movement. I'm going to talk about equity, health, and I'm going to talk about equity and so much of this subtype. So when I think about movement, the way the organization Move Together talks about it a lot, often, it's one of the oldest and closest commodities in our lives. You know, to use that word. It's with us from the very beginning and with us throughout. And it really guides how we engage with the world and how the world engages with us, how we run, how we play, how we dance, how we love, how we live. And it's that really big belief and true belief that when a person has an ability to maximize their movement capacity, I'm gonna piggyback on what you just said, maximize their movement capacity, they have the capacity and ability to maximize their life. My belief is that that's a universal right. So that's movement. That's how I think about it. That's how I wrestle about it. I think about that every day.
So can I piggyback with you for a minute?
Good, please do.
Because y'all think about it. So if, as a woman, if you have ever brought life into the world, you know that life is there in your belly. But the minute that the recognition takes on a whole nother level is when that child moves. And it is that way when we are born. And it is also that way in which we prepare for our transition. Because once someone starts to slow down their movement, then from a societal standpoint, we stop recognizing them as much. And even in the United States, that is at the point at which we start to institutionalize people because of their inability to move. So movement for us is almost tied to our identity and our worth as humans in society. I'm not saying that it's right or that it's wrong, but I'm just talking about the impact of movement. And just for those of us that movement is our jam, it is what we do, we should not take that honor lightly, that we are part of the journey of actually helping people to optimize their movement, which actually may also be one of the greatest manifestations of their life.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to start with the end in mind of what you just said. For all healthcare clinicians, or really anybody that is moving or helping family members move, and certainly clinicians, it's an honor, it's a responsibility, and it's certainly a privilege, and we need to take it as such in every single touch point. You said something really interesting. It's not a right or wrong thing and the institutionalization of it, but how we move, where we're allowed to move and all that good stuff is integral in our existence, like you said, our work, and that's a multidimensional word, and our identity. So going back to why is this conversation relevant? All that right there. And I love how you said from the very beginning. So from the very, very beginning, you know, and that word recognition, we're gonna have to play with that word. I love how you use that. You know, you got more to give with that word. You know, from that when person move like you described, there's a recognition, and there's that continuous recognition throughout let's say the journey, throughout existence, throughout the adventure.
Because that to me is also part of the conversation that is being had in regards to the racial conversation. This is a conversation about movement also, because what racism does, really what any ism does, is it tells that marginalized person, this is where you can be. And you can't be these other places because that's not for you. So when you start talking about racism, sexism, ageism, all these isms, that is also a movement deficiency and a deficit. So when I hear rehab professionals, healthcare professionals say, oh, we can't talk about that, I'm like, well, if you're in the game of movement and health, these isms also impact someone's ability to move throughout society. Because in essence, that's all it's about, is controlling where someone can go. So, yeah.
So let's bring that full circle for the next definition. Of movement is central to our lives and our very existence. And then as we know in society, there are environments and instances, not just instances, there's structurally integrating, which folks, based on their background, this or their history or their presentation or their genes, their movement potentiality is restricted and limited. Yeah. Thus restricting and limited part of their existence, you know, and their potential in their existence. Because at the end of the day, you know, we could always say rise up, bootstraps, the whole nine, but you're making things harder for the fulfillment of the optimization of one's life, wants to be, to explore. That word explore, you said it earlier, to travel, to explore, to run, to walk. You know, was it Ahmaud Arbery? I hope I'm getting his name right. In Atlanta, jogging. Young man was jogging, wanted to get some cardio, and his life was taken away when it should not have been.
Come on.
So we're wrestling with a few things at once here, but we need to be. We very much need to be.
Yes, you just taught a master class right there. Because that concept where you just talked about, you know, grab yourself up by the bootstraps, that is this whole philosophy called individualism, right? That if you just put the work in, you live in a place that you can make anything happen. But that is based on the assumption that someone is not going to impede your movement. It is based on the assumption that there are not going to be structures and infrastructures that are going to get in the way of your movement. So that whole concept is based on a fallacy, but we all believe it, right? We talk about it as if it is the American dream, that you are free to move wherever you want. But that is not the health of most of us. I will say the marginalized, our health is we are unhealthy because of many of the isms in the world.
Mm-hmm. Next, Lisa, I want us to touch on health. That's a large word, and then we're going to talk about equity next. Some definitions that you'll see is a state without injury or illness. You know, so neutral, defensive. On the offensive, I think in line with what we're talking about, the opportunity to live and fulfill your capacity fully. You know, your health, your health and your gene expression as fully as possible. That's how I think about health. I want to pass the baton to you. How do you think about it, Lisa?
I love your definition. It all comes back to capacity, right? Because I philosophically believe we were all called for a purpose. Everyone's called into existence for a purpose. And so have we created a world? Have we created a community? Have we created an educational program? Have we created a relationship where that other human can live to their fullest capacity? Or are we putting up unavoidable, right? So we're putting up avoidable barriers that interferes with that person's ability to fulfill their capacity. I love that definition. I love what you just said.
I love it. And I'm gonna piggyback on one of the words that you just used as we now talk about equity now. So the essence of equity. The way I think about equity, and when people get into the conversation, is it equal outcomes? Everybody should, no, but it is equal opportunity as much as that is possible, and the removing of barriers. You know, a friend of mine shared this analogy with me several years ago. So it goes, it's an interesting one, and see how this plays. He goes, imagine you're in a class, you know, a bunch of students in the class. And there's people in the front rows, front two rows, there's people in the third and fourth row, there's people in the fifth and sixth row, et cetera, et cetera. The task that the teacher has given to the class, the students in the class, she put a trash can in the middle and towards the chalkboard in the front of the class. The task is to crumple up a piece of paper and hit the shot. The people in front, they got better sight. They're closer, you know, and so their chance is a little bit higher. You know, and the people behind them, it's a little bit harder to see, a little bit further. They got to get some arc, a little more touch. They may not shoot with touch. Now you're throwing out the mechanics, the whole nine, and then people are further back. That's messing with equity and opportunity right now. And the other part to actually realize the people in the front, in fairness to some people, they're so focused on hitting the shot, they don't realize that they're in the front. You know, so that's why we're having these conversations, multidimensional awareness. You know, let's have everybody start in that front row. Let's put that thing in the middle, and let's give everybody the chance in the second grade class to hit the shot. So the best shooter gets a cupcake, so to speak, or whatever it is. So that's how I think about equity. I teased towards the end there, but that's how I think about equity.
Now, I think you're right on it, right? So equity is basically that absence of these avoidable barriers. So like in your example, the desk in the front. So if that teacher was going to say, okay, we're going to do this assignment, this task, and make sure that all the desks are in a row, then that would be equitable. Because really the fact that you've got desks in multiple rows and some people have further distances than others, you got to get over somebody's afro, somebody's hat, whatever, right? I just had to put that in there, y'all. Those are all things that are avoidable, conscious or unconscious. And we don't think about that in society of where there are avoidable barriers for others. And so that is what creates the inequity that we see in society. And I was reading an article, and now I can't think of what the author's name was, but they were talking also about this concept of horizontal. So horizontal and vertical equity. And so the example that they gave was, they said, well, you know, think about if you had a male and a female that had the same disease, same severity of disease, right? And they got the same treatment. That would be a horizontal equity, right? Because they're on the same level of disease, same severity of disease, so they both get the same treatment. That makes sense to us. So then the author goes on to say, well, you know, what if you had two men? And so you have one male that has a higher severity of disease compared to another male who has a less severe manifestation of that disease. The caregivers give the care that is appropriate for the severity of disease. That would be considered vertical equity, where you identify that there's a difference in presentation, and you then say, you know what, this makes sense that this person gets more medication or more treatment. So that, I mean, when you say it in those terms, it makes sense. But when we talk about things such as like social determinants of health and inequities in education, inequities in healthcare, people automatically go, well, why they got to get more? Because there is a vertical inequity that has to be addressed. You giving equal treatment is just going to make it look like this. It's not going to make it get to this. That's just not logical. You can have that conversation with a kindergartner. That makes no sense. So then this author goes on and talk about how that what we see particularly with women is that women may have the same disease as a man, may have different severities, but then will not receive equitable care. And that's what causes this vertical inequities. And that's why we have these sex-based differences in health outcomes, is because of vertical inequities. So it's just one of those where we have to say, why are we okay with saying we know that things are really bad in this community, in this zip code, but we're not going to give you the services that you need. In essence, a lot of times what we do in the United States is we will give more services to those people who don't need it, right? That are already what some people are calling in an obese state of resources. So if we want to talk about obesity from a physical standpoint, we can also talk about obesity from a resource standpoint. And both are manifestations of gluttony. So no one is better than the other. It's just a matter of what we're naming in society. But I think it's all an issue of recognizing the difference between equality and equity and making sure that we are providing an equitable society. That is the only way we will raise all the boats up.
Lisa, I want us to, before we dive into the next phase of the conversation, something has arose for us to do. We sort of touched on that. We're going to put it all together. But let's explore this and see where this evolves. All together, movement, health, equity. So I just wrote something down based on what we talked about, and I'm just pouring down some concrete. Wrestle with me on this. What's the verb? The allowing and the promoting. Maybe I'll use them both now. Allowing and promoting the equal opportunity to optimize movement capacity and thus existence. You know, I'm just stitching here. What do you think? How does that come across?
I love promoting. Because allowing to me feels passive, which is better than you getting in the way and impeding, because in essence, that's what many of us are doing from our places of privilege, right? Because there's only so many sidewalks your neighborhood needs. If you already got one on one side of the street, you probably don't need it on both. Let them take those resources and build a sidewalk in somebody else's community. So I like the term promoting, igniting, advocating, but something very action oriented. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. And then these are just words now, just stitching from our conversation. Promoting equal opportunity. Is it equal? Again, that word equal that doesn't always capture it. Promoting equal opportunity to optimize movement capacity and thus existence. I'm trying to tie some of those multi-dimensions together. We don't have to solve this right now, but sharpen that with me a little bit, and then we'll continue to play with it throughout this conversation in the weeks to come. What else would
I would say, if that's going to be the mission, the vision, I would almost lean towards equitable opportunity. I do often, when I talk to, Congress people, politicians, I will talk about the fact that I am okay with equality right now because some people have nothing, right? There are some communities that are not served, underserved as it relates to physical activity and movement. So equality to me would be the first step. But really what we need is equity if we're going to address those vertical differences in where different communities and where different persons are related to movement health. And I just love this term, movement health.
I love it. So we'll give this one more go for now. This is just, it's just some soft words together. Promote equitable opportunity to optimize movement capacity and thus existence. To start.
I'm loving the thus existence.
All right, so the next journey of the conversation, we talked about pain points. Let's start to delineate a little bit more. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing in this space? And let's start to concretize a little bit. It's socioeconomic, it's a fragmentation along demographics. We always play for social determinants of health, concepts like that. And then based on where we go from that, the next natural step is how are the differences that we're seeing actually truly manifest themselves. It's a 2-for-1 as well, but we'll make sure we capture that if we don't get it all. But in your experience in the space that you're playing in, and the things that I know you're thinking about, the conversation that we've had, Lisa, where are some of the fault lines in this arena that we're in?
As it relates to movement health and inequities?
Yes.
I will say that the pain point to me is the chronicity. I had a struggle saying that for a minute, y'all. So in full disclosures, I do have expressive aphasia, so sometimes it comes out. But I think COVID-19 has shown us that, right? That our decision to not address the health inequities within our society is part of the reason why we have lost so many lives related to COVID-19. Because the comorbidities tied to COVID-19 mortality are all things that were treatable, right? Be it treatable with health behavior modifications, be it treatable with medication, be it treatable with other lifestyle behaviors such as meditation, those kind of things. All of this was treatable, but we chose not to treat it as a society. We chose not to allocate those resources. And so from a historical standpoint, that really started about in the 1980s. The 80s is when there was a significant pivot in how we paid for healthcare in regards to, we switched from paying in regards to costs and more towards visits. There was a shift in regards to the deregulation of many of the components and practices associated with healthcare. There was a decreased funding in regards to healthcare programs and services. And so my husband and I are huge Gladiator fans, right? The movie. And so he talks about how that the things that you do will ripple in eternity. And that is what we are paying for. We are paying for decisions that were made 30, 40 years from now. And so regardless of where you stand on the aisle, right? Republican, Democrat, whomever you are, all of the parties have played a role in where we are at right now in regards to healthcare. And so we are at a place, I love, somebody called it a moral reckoning, of saying, are we going to make better decisions today so that our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will have a different reality? Because that reality is going to be based on what we do right now. But I think in the 80s was when Reagan really started talking about health disparities. And there was this beautiful conversation and legislation that really was supposed to improve the health and wellness of all. But then our practices in regards to how we started defunding things, what happened at the state and local levels didn't align with that sentiment. And we still see the same thing today, right? Everybody's got a health disparities, mission, but what are we doing in regards to really making that a dream and making that dream a reality? So there is definitely a difference. I think you have this beautiful statement that I'm going to steal. So Efosa talks about how that the problem is not development, but it is distribution. And I'm like, boy, masterclass right there.
I was going to cue you up on that thought as well. What I'm also hearing you saying, and we got to paint the picture of this and make it rise up, is that word choice. Choices were made and are being made, and they're going to be made in the future. So with that idea of choice signifies it could be this or that, or it could be multiple, there's multivariate. So with these choices, there's a responsibility. And it's a radical responsibility that we all have to take. The student clinicians, how do you connect with that person that looks different from you? The clinician, the clinic manager, the healthcare administrator, the politician. There's choices that we made in this pursuit of a larger and greater good. So this is not the time for us to shy away from the responsibilities for good and better that are before us. Let's choose to lean in on the individual level and on the collective level. So it's a call to action, really. Start curious. Let's have these conversations. Lisa, I'm learning from you in this conversation. We're going to be learning some people as these conversations going on. It's humble in our approach, but it's aspirational aim. But let's choose to go in that better direction. Choice again.
I so agree. And this may offend some of the listeners, because I am of the opinion that as a healthcare provider, when you work in a clinic or hospital, wherever you're at, community worker, you're grassroots in the field, if you do not see the connection between you interacting and advocating and helping on a personal level and also on a community and societal level, in my opinion, I feel like that is very parasitic. And here's the reason why I say that. Is because many times you are getting paid, right, to do that work. So in essence, it's not really even advocacy work. It's a service. You're getting paid. Now, this stuff that you have to do on the communal and societal level, that to me is the advocacy work. That is where you say that I am truly connected to your experience. But the stuff you do within those four walls of the clinic, and you want to rah-rah that, and yeah, thank you so much for your service. But that is only really impacting that person and that maybe personal relation, right, with their caregiver. But if we are going to change the world, the change occurs by changing the structure. And we have to realize that as healthcare providers, because we often confuse health promotion with population health or community health. Those are two very different things. I can promote health for you as an individual, and even I can do health promotion within a community. But for me to change population health or community health, we're gonna have to change some policies and some structures. And that can't just be done within the four walls of your clinic. That's gotta be done on the steps of Congress. That's gotta be done by you doing some advocacy work and some marching and being very informed about what's going on in communities. That is where you are working on the greater movement health.
I love that so much. I love that so much. I want to touch on that word change, and then the next phase of our conversation on the back holes here, we're gonna talk about how do we consider the past, and we're gonna look into the future. But that concept of change, I've moderated some conversations in universities, and we talked about change and the social dynamics and how to consider it, because it may seem like a lot. You know, change is not always that easy, because it sometimes means the deconstructing of a part of you to reconstruct what is hopefully better. You know, you don't have to boil the whole ocean. Start with yourself sometimes. You know, start watching your thoughts. Start watching your words. Start watching your actions, because our thoughts affect our words affect our actions reflect our words reflect our thoughts. Start watching this and start thinking about, what are you tolerating? Issues that we're tolerating in your environment. What words, what actions are you tolerating in your environment? Start there. For those who are not near a capital city right now, we'll find one eventually, but start there, because that's the rippling effect into eternity that Maximus Decimus Meridius talked about. I love that movie as well. Okay, next I want us to look to the past, Lisa. You know, the idea of the past, because in some of these conversations, there are many that say that the past doesn't matter, but the past is not the past. You know, the past isn't dead, it's not even past. Who talks about that? I forget the guy that talks about that. It'll come to me. But there's a great quote by George Bernard Shaw. He goes, "If history repeats itself and the unexpected always happens, how incapable must man be from learning from his own mistakes?" If history repeats itself and the unexpected always happens, how incapable must man be from learning from his own mistakes? The things that happened in the past matter. There's residuality. They're 100% saturation, or at least some. You know, so we can't say that's in the past. There's a great graphic that I'm going to show right now. It's a ProPublica article talking about the rates of Black Americans getting amputations in the U.S., which is disproportionately high relatively to other demographic groups. What is interesting about it, I'm going to cue it up and show it via screen share, is that the highest, use the word saturation, of Black Americans with amputations, leg amputations, below knee, above knee, et cetera, overline. Let me just screen share now. Lisa, my screen share there?
Yes, sir.
Overlined with the slave states of the past. So I'm not calling causation, I'm not calling correlation, but this is information. History matters. Okay, so Lisa, I'm going to pass you the baton. How should we, before we talk about looking ahead, how should we consider the past?
So I think, you know, when we talk about considering the past, I think the trajectory looks the same as it looks for the self-work that many of us are doing in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So step number one is awareness. So you got to acknowledge it, right? And there's going to be different opinions on this. And I know our president said, well, it is what it is. And I find some authenticity in that statement, that you got to know what it is. You got to acknowledge it. But then after that, you got to humble yourself. And what I mean by humble yourself is that you've got to say, okay, what in my lived experience or my family's lived experience contributed to that? And for some of us, it's going to be, you know, was your family actively part of the slave trade, both white, black, whomever you are? For others of us, is it the fact of that as you move through society, you left some people behind, right? That's the lesson from Wakanda. And what happens when you leave those behind? So I think there first has to be an awareness. But instead of saying it is what it is, then I need you to have some humility about it and say, okay, how did we contribute? What choices have I made or have we made that allowed this to happen? Because the graphs that you showed, you could show that same graph with obesity, with hypertension, with other cardiovascular diseases. You could show that graph with depression. Mm-hmm. And so then we have to ask ourselves, okay, there has to be some correlation, some causation here. Even if we do not have the math or the statistics to be able to do it yet, just human logic would tell you what is the story there. And I think it gets back to how the social determinants of health and also the social determinants of education are so intermingled with our historical choices as a society. And we have to own that. We have to be humble about it. And then step number 3 is we have to respond. And so that is those last 2 steps are where I feel like we have repeated failures as a society. And I typically define a failure as if the outcome does not change, then I have failed. Now I can have multiple mistakes as long as the outcome changes, then it is not a failure. But right now, as Americans, and even on a global scale, we right now are failing because we are not willing to change the outcome. And we are only one choice away from changing the outcome.
So well said. And I think what that graph also demonstrates or represents, if we want to add a word to, is that, and to bring trauma back, intergenerational trauma. It's real, and that's a whole nother podcast or conversation right there. You know,
because you kept talking about. I love the fact that you talked about gene expression, because one of the conversations that people will often get into is, well, genetically we're not that different. That is very true. Genetically we are not that very different, but from a gene expression standpoint, we are extremely different, and that differential in gene expression is related to your lived experience. So where someone lives, where someone is born, where they work, all those social determinants of health, that accounts for 80% of health outcomes. And there are multiple reports that have been published about that, and how that really 20% of the stuff that we do in the clinics and hospitals is directly tied to health outcomes. It is really most about those social determinants of health.
It should make sense to us, rehab clinicians. We think about Wolff's law, the tension we put on our system leads to rebuilding. You know, if we're not having optimal tension to our system, our cells, our soul, our spirit, our energy, we're not going to rebuild or grow as much as we should. So we can make these analogies here. Lisa, as in this winding down, I'm going to connect a few things together. It's why should we care and why now? And we'll tie that into a what's next, and we'll answer this together. I think about the Thomas Dunn quote. Thomas Dunn, every man's death affected me because I'm involved in mankind. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Every man's death affected me because I'm involved in mankind. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I am my brother and my sister's keeper. You know what happens around the corner. You know what happens in Guatemala. What happens is going to affect what happens in Georgia. What happened in the steps of Brooklyn could affect Baghdad. You know, so we have, it's real, you know, in the world that we're in, and it's right, so to speak. So when we lean into a space like this, when we're looking to change the system, it changes things for the better. It changes things for the collective, and us as individuals, we're also part of that collective. So let's get that tide rising up. So I want to pass that to you, Lisa.
I think you just summed that up, right? Because that was that was the impetus for the Ujima Institute. So Ujima is a Swahili word that means collective responsibility. I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. So I'm totally with you on that.
Okay. So then, Lisa, what's next? And that's a very macro word, but I want to give you the baton to that, and then we'll see if there's any questions or thoughts there. But what's next on the front of what people should be considering, what people could be reading, what steps can be taken on the micro and the macro level right now? Just what comes to heart and mind, and what might be next?
So I will be the first to acknowledge that these are very complex, multifactorial issues, right? Because we've built these very large historical structures that have perpetuated a lot of the ailments in our society. So it's just like, you know, that age of saying, how do you eat an elephant? A bit at a time, a chunk at a time. So whatever is within your sphere of influence, that's where you start. And that may be within your own home, that may be within yourself by addressing the bias, the racism, or any places where you feel like you may be impacting the movement of another, be it physical, be it social. So that to me is the first place to start, is to kind of have that reflective activity with yourself and say, okay, what can I do based on my sphere of influence? And I caution people because often we will pick something small because that is what we are comfortable with. But I will ask that you really say to yourself, where can I let my light shine and really shine? So figure out what is in your sphere of influence. The other thing is that if you're at a place where you're like, I don't really know if I believe this, then just get on the internet. Look at something like Walk Scores. Go to the Robert Wood Foundation website and put in your zip code, and then put in that zip code of the neighborhood that you didn't want to live in, and look at what the differences are in life expectancy. Look at how far those people have to go to get to a grocery store, which is going to provide them the things that they need to fuel their movement. Open up and read some books. And I know right now everyone's like anti-racism and, you know, how to not be an anti-racist. Those are all great. But as Efosa talked about historical premise, go back and find you a copy of the Philadelphia Negro, written by W.E. Du Bois. Start there and realize that we are having the same conversation more than 100 years later. And so for those of you that are well-versed in movement, think about that. If we are at a place of stagnation for more than 100 years, how well or how healthy are we as a society? Other things to read is to read the Black and Minority Health document that was published by the Ronald Reagan Health and Human Services Secretary, Margaret Heckler, that was published in 1985. If you have not read the 2003 Institute of Medicine on Equal Treatment document, you just need to sit down with that with a cup of coffee, glass of wine, whatever is your jam. Because after you read that, if you do not believe, then that is intentional. Then there's a wonderful book by Dorothy Roberts called The Killing of the Black Body. That book will make you cry, because at that point you will realize how we as a society have really caused significant trauma within the Black community, particularly amongst Black females, a group of people that we are like, why are y'all so fat? Why are you so damaged? Read that book, and that book will bring you insight. Then there's also The Medical Apartheid, for those of you who really like history and understanding how woven our injustices are. The Color of the Law is a beautiful book about how we have created policies and practices that have marginalized people systemically and in many places strategically. And then the last one, oh, that book's written by Richard Rothstein. And then the last one is The Cast. So The Cast was written by Wilkerson, and that's a 2020 read that's just out. So you can start reading from the 1800s all the way to the 2000s and see how much stagnation and decreased movement we've had on this issue as Americans. Sorry, Dr. Efosa.
No, thank you so much. Those are some resources. I wrote one or two down that I wasn't familiar with. So, Lisa, as we wind down now, where can people learn more about the Ujima Institute and some of the wonderful things and good work that you guys do?
Awesome. So you can just go to the ujimainstitute.com. We also have a Facebook page. We're really at a place now where we're getting excited. We've got about 50 PTs, OT, speech practitioners, both therapists and assistants, that we are almost done drafting the Black Rehabilitation Manifesto. So we have come together to talk about a list of demands that we want to see to improve the health and wellness of the Black community. But yeah, just reach out to us at the ujimainstitute.com.
I love it so much. My closing thoughts, to sum up a few thoughts. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing time with us today, and it's so high pleasure to share time with you. Everybody that joined, that's watching live, or that may catch this afterwards, thank you guys for joining, and we'll be engaging in any comments and questions. Be checking that a little bit later on. Some of the things to think about is just starting to think on a macro level, thinking about things multidimensionally and across different layers and concentrically. Things like movement, obviously, things like trauma, things about the effect, positive and negative, we can have on the body, yes, and the body politic. You know, going for scalable change into eternity, like we said. So that vertical and that horizontal change, and to just go back to that earlier thought, the African proverb, so much wisdom from that continent, is if we want to go fast, we'll go along. You can sprint, you know, but if you really want to go far, and this is a long runway, if you want to go far with intention and make progress, let us all come together from different demographics, socioeconomic status, different regions around the world, to be on the same team for this aim. This is what we're trying to aim for and win. The best world possible for everybody.
Yes.
That's the journey that we're on. Sending everybody our absolute best. Cheers.